fearless prophet of ancient Galilee. Your life is still a summons to serve humanity, to make our thoughts and actions less prone to please the crowd, to stand with humble courage for truth with hearts abound. Oh, help us stand unswerving against war's bloody wave, where hate and lust and falsehood hold back your holy sway. Forbid false love of country that turns us from your call, who lives above the nation, the neighborhood of all. Create in us unswerving against when hearts are kind, that knows not race nor station as boundaries of the mind, that learns to value beauty in a heart or mind or soul, and live to see God's children as sacred, perfect whole. Stir up in us a protest against unneeded wealth, for some go starved and hungry, who plead for work and health. Once more give us your challenge above our noisy day, and come to lead us forward along your holy way.
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Community Church. Our building is on Shaver Road in Portage, Michigan, on the ancestral lands of the Peoria Potawatomi people. We pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. It's a little brick church with a rainbow flag and the Black Lives Matter banner out in the front because we believe that love is love and that it is our responsibility to dismantle white supremacy and build a beloved community that benefits us all. Church is served most Sundays by our minister, Reverend G. Ludwig McCartney, and we are a community on diverse spiritual journeys. We enjoy hearing different points of view from guest ministers, lay leaders, or as in today, a guest speaker. My name is Nancy Kelmy, and I'm happy to be your lay leader. If you're joining us on Facebook for the first time, welcome. We're excited that you tuned in. We invite and encourage you to attend the Zoom coffee hour following the service to get to know us better. You can find the link to coffee hour in the comments section of this video. To learn more about our church, including our programs for children and youth, and other opportunities to connect during the week, visit our website at www.unitarian.org. uucommunitychurch.org. Special thanks to everyone who is helping to make this morning's service possible, our musicians, our tech team, and you. On this day around the world, Unitarian Universalists light the chalice. We are truth seekers. We seek a truth that is so strong it can withstand our questioning and our doubts. The flame reminds us of what we have in common here, and so we bring it to life. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Unitarian Universalists seek out wisdom from the world's religions, which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual life. Among these are Jewish and Christian teachings, which calls us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Today, we will learn about the rule of Saint Benedict and why a 6th century guide to living in community would apply to our modern lives. I will begin with an excerpt from Esther de Waal's book on the subject, A Life-Giving Way. I find it very significant that as more and more people are searching for ways in which to deepen their spiritual lives, there is a growing interest in the monastic tradition. Here is a spirituality that is grounded, coming out of the hard-won experience of men and women who have faced so many of the questions that are inescapable. How do I live with myself? How do I live with others? How do I relate to the world around me? How do I find time and space for God? The fact that the rule was written by a layman for lay people is also significant, especially for those of us who are lay people and who are aware of the importance that this is our vocation. The realization that this is the context of the rule is liberating and encouraging. When I use the word liberating, it reminds me of what distance I have traveled since I first assumed, knowing little or nothing of its actual content, that the rule was bound to be restricting, negative, indeed life-denying. Since then, I have come to feel totally differently. I have come to see it as wisdom, not law, a way of life, not a set of directives. The Latin word regula, translated rule, is a feminine noun and carries gentle connotations, a guidepost, a railing, something that gives me support as I move forward in my search for God. I find that Benedict touches us all because he shows such a deep grasp of the human psyche. He writes out of this sense of who we are and where we are on our human journey. This can only come from his own experience. He recognizes the deepest of all human needs, the need for order, inner and outer, the need to love and be loved, and above all, the need to be at home in the many levels of meaning that the word can carry. I'm so pleased today to be the lay leader for a dear friend of mine, the Reverend William Spaid. Bill earned his Master's of Divinity in 1986 and served as the rector at St. Martin's in Kalamazoo prior to joining the staff of the Episcopal Diocese of Western Michigan. He served as canon to the ordinary for over 15 years before shifting into the role of canon missioner. Bill now serves as the chief pastoral assistant to the bishop and is a consultant to clergy and congregations in times of transition or challenges. He plans to retire from the diocese in 2020 to enjoy his life with his partner, Greg Fitzgerald, his 2 children, and 4 grandchildren. Bill was introduced to St. Benedict's rule in seminary and has maintained an interest in it throughout his career. I now hand over to Bill to tell you more about it.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a privilege to be with you this morning. Thank you for the invitation. I'm just delighted to be with you. As Nancy said, I was introduced to St. Benedict about 37 years ago when I was in seminary by a little book that was written by Esther DeWall called Seeking God, the Way of St. Benedict. And I don't know that you can see that, but it's just a small little book, but it had a huge impact on my life. And then after I came to Kalamazoo in 1982, I had the opportunity to spend a week with Esther DeWall in a Benedictine experience at the Abbey, St. Benedict's Abbey in Three Rivers, and at the Hermitage that's also in the Three Rivers area. Esther was the wife of a former dean of Canterbury Cathedral, and her interest in Benedict came about because of the cathedral's history and association with the Benedictine monks there back in the Middle Ages. The rule of St. Benedict is countercultural, really. We live in a secularized, morally confused, and culturally diverse world. And the rule can be adapted widely. It can, I believe, help in the preservation of a civilization that is sometimes, at least it feels like, is crumbling around the edges. The rule itself is a radical concept. It's revolutionary. And when I say radical, I mean radical in the sense of what the traditional root of that word is meaning going back to our roots. It's authentic in its cultural needs and in its rhythm, its activity. It thinks about things that must be more than producing and more than being entertained, which is so much about what our current culture is about. It takes us back to a place where humanity is allowed to grow through its memory, through its intelligence, and through its love. There are many aspects of the rule that speak to the economy and to the culture. Benedict was very serious about the environment and makes us realize that the world isn't a storehouse for raw materials for our use, and that in the production of our lives, we have to look at the broader picture of human growth and not just the material things that come out of our lives. Rowan Williams, who was a former Archbishop of Canterbury, speaking on the rule of Benedict, talks about the role of the abbot or the leader. And he says that the leader is not to pursue an individual agenda, but to seek the immense, elusive goal of a common life in which each can recognize their good and their flourishing, their good and their flourishing in the life they share and in mutual dependence. When I was doing a little bit of preparation for today, I was looking at the principles of the UU community, where justice and compassion and respect for the interdependence in the web of all existence are important values that you hold. And those are the kinds of things that Benedict was concerned about. Benedict was an early 6th century Italian. He was born about the year 400, and his rule was written for a group of laymen. He's known to the rest of the world through his biographer, St. Gregory the Great, who sent St. Augustine in the late 500s and a group of other Benedictines to England. And that's where so much of English religious culture comes from, which is, of course, part of my tradition as an Episcopalian and an Anglican. Rome had fallen to the barbarians in about the year 410, and there had been a lot of trauma to the civilized world, and the barbarians began to dismantle the Roman Empire. It was a nasty and brutish world, and the rule shows a sense of balance and moderation and reasonableness, which really have allowed it to survive for over 1,500 years now. The rule itself is a very tiny little book. It's less than 100 pages, very thin. And in the prologue, St. Benedict writes, "Therefore we intend to establish a school for the Lord's service. In drawing up its regulations, we hope to set down nothing harsh, nothing burdensome." Benedict sets out to create a way of life which is balanced, nourishing, and attentive. He begins the rule with the word listen. Listen. We listen to our bodies. We are attentive to its needs, but we also need to listen to others and to seek God in them. The word rule in Latin is regula, and it's not a code, but as Esther Dewall says, it is an invitation that points the way. So think for a minute, what is regula in your life? What shapes us? What gives rhythm to our lives? What are the ordinary, regular things? Our shower in the morning, the first cup of coffee, our drive to work, perhaps listening to NPR on the radio, the routine of your job or profession, washing the dishes, reading and TV, putting the kids to bed. The rule takes a holistic view of life. It's concern for the whole human being with a sense of balance, and therefore there's a tension of work, of study, of prayer, and a need for repentance in the sense that we need to continue to turn and pull us back to God, who is the center of our lives. I don't know how that happened. He wants us to take commitment seriously, living a Godward life, seeking God, and being founded by God. There are three promises that the monk makes in the monastic life, in the Benedictine monastic life anyway, of stability, obedience, and conversion of life. The rule and that word conversion of life translates really to the fidelity to the monastic life, to taking the time to live it out, with the emphasis being on community. The Latin word is conversatione, which means a manner of life. And the word morum means habit or manners or morals, which means living the life in accordance to the rules that allow you to stretch, to grow, to bend a little bit, perhaps like a willow. And there are a number of sort of triads in the rule of study, of work, and of rest. Unlike some other traditional vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, the ancients understood these three vows of stability, obedience, and conversion really as one. Esther Dewall says, "Yet to speak as though there were three separate promises is misleading, for they cohere, and it is impossible to keep one without keeping the other two." So the Benedictine way of life permeated the culture of England and really most of Europe for over 900 years. In England, there was hardly a community that couldn't hear the bells of a nearby monastery until in 1536, when King Henry VIII began to suppress and dissolve over 825 monastic communities and appropriate their lands and their treasures to the crown. A minute, there we go. Some of the abbeys, like Rievaulx Abbey, which is in the north part of Yorkshire, were destroyed and allowed to decay. Some were turned into cathedrals or other minsters, like Westminster Abbey, that you're probably familiar with. And the monks in those places became the secular canons, or other clergy virtually maintaining a way of life in those magnificent buildings that continues even until today. And then there were others, like Bolton Abbey, which is also in the north of England, which were partially destroyed. But the nave of the old abbey church became the parish church, and the monks who were the laborers in the monastic fields became the laymen in those congregations. And their way of life is reflected in our Anglican Book of Common Prayer, and then the ethos of the church, which was ordered and encompassing the breath of life, with something that, as the rule says, is not harsh or burdensome, but understanding of individuals and their needs while encouraging spiritual growth and taking care of the larger community. Those values permeate our church's culture and become for us what we refer to as a Benedictine promise. Part of my role in the life of the church today is to work in congregational development. And as we understand that Benedictine promise, we understand ourselves as part of a living tradition, that it deepens our spiritual commitment, and we learn to adapt and to change in changing situations and to changing circumstances while holding on to the values that bring us nearer to God. Certainly that's an important aspect in this time of immense change that we've experienced in the last few months. And that we use those patterns and structures and wisdom of the rule to inform intentional communities. The three vows that the monks take are stability, obedience, and conversion of life. Stability is seen in our way of worship, in our prayer, in our rootedness to place, and in our relationship. We talk about finding God in this community, with these people, in this particular situation. When we think of obedience, we think of our openness to listen and to respond to one another and to the larger church and to the world. And as we think about conversion of life, we think about stability or obedience, we see it and act on new challenges and opportunities for mission and for building up the body. We learn to live within community norms in our tradition, including the constitution and canons and bylaws of the church. And I assume, like the principles that you have, that those are things that you hold and value and try to live out in a daily kind of way. There's a tension in those rules, in the threefold rules of stability and obedience and conversion of life. And I want to focus for a minute on the rule of stability, what it means, how it functions in the monastery, and how it connects to our work in congregational development. What I want you to see, or to understand perhaps, is that these ancient practices that have formed the church still have relevance as we interpret them to fit our own culture and to utilize them to reinvigorate the life of our congregations. And I think that that's kind of a revolutionary concept. Benedict speaks of stability in several places throughout the world. Rule. The worship where we are to toil faithfully at all these tasks is the enclosure of the monastery, and he speaks of the stability of the community. It's not so much a vow as it is a promise, an attribute, a quality of how a community is supposed to be. Its very being is stable. And when I think about my work in congregational development anyway, one of our goals, I think, is to have stable parish communities, because stable communities, and this is a real paradox in God's world, stable communities are much better able to accommodate change and to bend and move with the times and the seasons. William Bridges, in his book, Managing Transitions, says people have to understand that the point of change is to preserve that which does not change. Later in the rule of Benedict, He speaks of stability in terms of place, to stay rooted for life in one monastery. For us, I think it means to find grace where we are, attending to it in the moment. And as we embrace life, we begin to find it. Stability is that sense of perseverance, of endurance, of hanging on when we realize that running won't help us grow, and we explore then what God wants us to learn in this place and in this time. Joan Chittister, who is a Benedictine nun, speaks about stability and says, through stability, we develop the rigors it takes to live through what life deals us. And we are certainly in a time where life is dealing us some changes and unexpected things. We are to see change and challenge in life as God's voice in our ears. It raises us beyond the changing feelings of the day to the obligations of a lifetime. Stability is giving over to God's kingdom our stable and committed love. And to work it out demands really our own growth. There's always this creative tension, a push, a pull. It's not destructive and stressful, but rather healthy and dynamic. Because without change and growth, stability is really a prison. But without stability, change is total chaos. So Benedictine stability then is really countercultural. We want to be on the move. We're a culture on the move, on the go. And sometimes we're chained to our own restlessness. But the stability of place, that exterior place where we remain in a situation, and the stability of our own hearts, our rootedness in God, our stability is ultimately knowing that God is with us. And being rooted and grounded gives us a center that is holy and a deep well that we can then tap into. It's a helpful tool, I think, for living in this time of immense change. Community is the workshop for stability. It's important for relationships and for staying connected, even if that means electronically through Zoom. It doesn't mean that we stay where we are, where we're not safe or abused, or where we're not able to flourish, but that we find that place within that allows us to be rooted and where we can grow. And here I think is the connecting point for us. If a community, as the monastery was, is the workshop for stability, and stability can encourage growth and change, then that really promotes more stability within the life of the community. It helps with our preservation. And then we have some clarity about who we are and what we are trying to do. In other words, we find purpose for our lives. I want to talk a little bit about the rule of life and how that affects us personally. When you think of a rule of life and think of it in a more personal way, take a moment to think about your typical week, the things that are routine or ordinary. Your work, doing church on Sunday morning, your exercise, gardening, children's soccer and hockey, perhaps a date night, regular doctor's visits. Think about those things that you'd like to be part of your week that help make your week normal and order and regularized. When we think of a rule of life, we often think of something that is imposed on us, like traffic rules or school rules, or the doctor's rules and orders, the policies and procedures of our various institutions and churches, and even monastic rules like the rule of Benedict or the canons of the church, which are the rules of our church. But those rules really are not imposed, but they become a measuring stick of how a particular community describes how it chooses to live. It tells us how we want to order our lives in the best practices of good health and harmony. When St. Benedict starts out his rule, he says, let us set out on this way, referring in his case to the rule or to the life of gospel living. In setting out its regulations, we hope to set down nothing harsh, nothing burdensome. He talks about always making progress, moving ever deeper into that inexpressible delight of love. It's an invitation to us, a balance and a tension between work and study and prayer. When I was able to go to the gym, I worked with a trainer, and he would often have me standing on a bosun ball, which is kind of a half rubber ball that is rooted on a very heavy plastic disc. And he would have me stand on this ball and do my weight exercises while trying to keep balance. And there was always this sort of movement and tension as I tried to keep myself standing up on the ball. And that's really kind of what the rule is about. It's finding that balance in our own lives, looking at the things that are ordinary in our lives, finding the tension there, and keeping things all together. When we speak of rule of life, we are not imposing other rules on ourselves, but we use the rules to guide and enlighten us. For me, the baptismal promises, our catechism, the way we come to work or to church on a week-by-week basis, are all parts of the rule of life. I think perhaps for folks in the UU tradition, which is the values are very much similar to those in my own, the things of worth and dignity, of justice, compassion, of spiritual growth, of finding truth and meaning, of looking towards peace and liberty, and respecting the interdependent web that we all exist within. Those are all parts, really, of a rule of life, ways that we want to hold in tension so that our lives stay in balance. And we want to become more disciplined in that respect, to identify the gifts that we have and use them well. They are intended as a help, not a hindrance. Benedict says that he sets down nothing burdensome. So the rule of life really is intended to be liberating and not restrictive. The rule is a means to an end and not the end in itself. It therefore opposes any kind of legalism. Its theological premise is that order is heaven's first law. And the rule implies order, and it's the opposite of an order. It's when we think about the freedom that it has, it contains us so that our life is free and not full of chaos. Not liberty. It focuses more rather on liberty and not on confusion. A long, long time ago, I taught first grade, and I had a student in my class whose name was Wayne, and Wayne could not sit still. He was everywhere in the room. I would find him in a cupboard underneath the sink, or sitting up on a shelf above the coat rack in the coat closet. He was never where he was supposed to be, and I was often concerned about his safety. And I finally had what I thought was a rather brilliant idea, and took a roll of masking tape and put a great big box on the floor around his desk, probably 6 or 8 feet, kind of like a social distancing space, and said to Wayne, "You can go anywhere you want as long as you stay in the box." And after that, I didn't worry whether Wayne was in his chair or not, because he really did stay in the box. He was free to move. Suddenly he had some order that gave him freedom and flexibility, but it also kept him safe and really the whole classroom safe. So that's kind of what the rule is intended to do. It gives us a context for living our lives that keep order and keep chaos away, which really I think is in a time of immense change is really helpful to us in terms of how we cope and how we are able to live. There are 5 characteristics to the rule of life. It is to be embraced and not promised. We choose to undertake its obligations and its duties spiritually by embracing kind of the total scheme, looking at the whole picture of rule and of prayer. And we only break the rule by giving up on the whole principle of the thing. So this second then characteristic of the rule is that it's opposed to that legalism that I mentioned. The keeping of a rule without any kind of fault is of no importance whatsoever because it really is a means to an end. It's incompatible with legalists, and it presupposes a soul enlightened by the living Spirit of God. It has no use for the dead letter of the law. The third characteristic of the rule is that it's not a burden, but really is the principle of a civilized life. The regular exercise times of work, of meals, of play, it keeps us from clutter and of petty and unnecessary decisions. And the fourth characteristic of the rule is that to break the rule is not a sin. It really is kind of an amoral thing. We embrace the rule in spirit. And fifth, the rule is and must always remain variable. It needs to be relaxed, modified, and it should be utilitarian. It should help us. It should be an aid, a tool to us. And so if you want to think about constructing your own rule of life, think of it as being shaped within a community. It can only begin if there is a connection. It's based on our personal circumstances, on our own temperaments, and on our own gifts. It should be unobtrusive, that we grow into our rule. And it should be simple and efficient. And it should actually demand some sort of creative discipline, but without the burdens. We have no need to worry overmuch about duty or about what ought to be done next, because an orderly and integrated life, especially an orderly and integrated prayer life, become a part of it itself. It's all about pattern and perspective. Martin Thornton, who was an English priest and a wonderful spiritual director and spiritual writer, wrote, "The rule can be kept without fault occasionally, a few times frequently, and if it all goes to pieces, very rarely, there's almost nothing to worry about." And so it becomes really a way for us to engage the life of community and the life of prayer. When I talked earlier about that Benedictine promise for us as Anglicans, it really reflects then a balanced life of prayer, of study, of work, a balanced life where in the center we find friendship and covenant and trust. We discover then the decorum and the courtesy of God, creating appropriate and safe boundaries, putting others at ease and making them comfortable, taking time and taking care of ourselves and of others. I hope that this little introduction to Benedict and to the rule of life could be a helpful tool for you. And I'll be happy when we are finished with our time to continue in the Zoom meeting with you and have some opportunity for chat. Nancy?
Thanks, Bill. I really enjoyed hearing that. I like the idea that, a balance of work, study, prayer, some discipline and order, it gives you the stability that allows you the strength to make change.
Exactly.
It's like the rug isn't pulled out from under you. So that's really cool. Thank you so much, Bill.
You're welcome.
So now is the time for our offering for our church. We acknowledge that our lives have been graced by many gifts. If you desire and are able to donate to our church, which still has the same expenses as pre-COVID-19, There are a few ways to do that. You may mail a check to our building. You may give electronically through our church website, or you can use the Give Plus app on a smartphone or a tablet. Your donations are sincerely appreciated and allow us to continue giving this life-giving message to the wider world. And Nick will play us some beautiful music now.
May nothing evil cross this door, and may ill fortune never pry about these windows. May they roar and rain go by. By faith made strong, the rafters will withstand the battering of the storm. The heart, though all the world grow chill, will keep you warm. Peace shall walk softly through these rooms, touching our lips with holy wine, till every casual corner blooms into a shrine. With laughter drown the raucous shout, and though these sheltering walls are thin, may they be strong to keep hate out and hold love in.
Thank you, Nick. That's one of my favorites. As we extinguish the chalice, let us remember to keep the flame awake and alive in our souls, and let the light of the chalice bind us together, showing us the way. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Bill?
Life is short, my friends, and we do not have too much time to gladden the hearts of those who traveled away with us. So be swift to love and make haste to be kind. And may the God of power and love bless, preserve, and keep you now and forever. Amen.